The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I guess the next question becomes, how do we make it transactional? Not just from this investment group to this investment group, but more so, you're going down to your grocery store, you're using Bitcoin, you're going to the restaurant, you're buying a car, XYZ.
Yeah, so today it's suitable for kind of larger purchases where you want final settlement, right? So it would be more common to see a yacht or a house be paid for with Bitcoin than it would.
Price of transactions or the price, yeah, right.
Yeah, because there's a transactional cost. I think your average or median transaction fee today is probably like $15 if you want to get into the next block.
Yeah,
So
like
the
wiring money.
equivalent. Yeah, so really exactly the way to think about it, like a wire. That doesn't mean that, the Fed wire system is bad because it has a high transactional overhead. It just means that it's a different set of trade-offs compared to, a payment system. And I mean, of course you understand this, but a lot of commentators in the press don't. Like, they'll compare Bitcoin to Visa and say, well, Bitcoin does 1/100th of the transactions that Visa does, so, it's a worse system. It's just a very different system. You're not getting final settlement with Visa. Visa is a payments network that's like 5 layers above, the actual acquirer and merchant banks where the settlements occur. And one, interbank settlement that's probably happening on ACH or Fedwire or chips, that's probably, clearing hundreds of thousands or millions of individual credit transactions, right? So Bitcoin should be compared to those slow moving utility scale, kind of like real-time gross settlement systems would be what I would compare it to. So the question is like, okay, well, why would you want to use an industrial settlement system to clear value? And I think it's if you are settling value between mutually untrusting counterparties, especially on a cross-border basis, where you want relatively rapid final settlement with strong assurances, that's when you would use Bitcoin. So international trade, export businesses, payroll, even if you have a globally distributed team, things like that, B2B payments, those kinds of like high assurance, high integrity payments where you may not necessarily trust your counterparty. You might have to hop over a few jurisdictions. You don't want to go through the correspondent banking system, things like that. That's where it makes the most sense today. Now, that said, like, people are actively building payment style networks on Bitcoin, and that's going to introduce a whole different set of trade-offs. Like Lightning, for instance, we're looking at startups that are using Lightning for, streaming payments on the internet. So instead of, you could even set it up for your podcast if you wanted. People could pay per minute, and those settlements would be streaming to your account directly. That doesn't really work with the way that payments work on the internet today, because you have to have kind of a minimum size for them to be viable. But with something like Lightning, you could have that constant tiny stream of micropayments. So it gives you more configurability once you introduce other layers that are built on Bitcoin. But yeah, the base layer itself is like really, really limited in what it is suitable for, basically.
So for the layman, what are the trade-offs with Lightning? It sounds like that could be a potential solution to get us to that point where it's transactional, where again we reduce vol, introduce debt and whatnot. But for the person who doesn't really, is really interested in Bitcoin, they understand it to a certain degree, but they don't really understand Lightning. How does it work, and then what are the trade-offs?
Yeah, so I would compare Lightning to like a bar tab. So you go to the bar and you order a drink, and maybe you order 10 drinks, over the course of the night.
Yeah.
All the bars around me are closed, so I can't even remember the last time I was at the bar. Maybe one day I'll be able to go to a bar again.
I've gone for both of us, Nick.
So so you order your favorite beer. My favorite beer is Coors Light. People give me a lot of crap for that, but
Oh, that's what I used to drink in college too. Yeah, they used to give me crap too. They say, "Oh, you're drinking that water. You're drinking the water." But I always used to like.
no, it's great. When the mountains turn blue, that's how you know it's cold, of course. You need a visual signifier that it's cold. Otherwise, how are you meant to know that it's cold? You have no other way of knowing. Anyway, so you go to the bar, you're drinking 10 Coors Light. you only need to pay once, right, when you settle your tab. But you've done 10 transactions, right? So in this analogy, the Bitcoin base layer is that one final payment that you do at the end of the night. And those 10 transactions where you're going back and forth between you and the bar with IOUs, basically, those are the Lightning payments. So, Lightning sort of industrializes that. And of course, it's done in a more automated way, but it basically allows you to batch together many individual payments with
your Bitcoin tab.
With the Bitcoin tab. And then the beauty of Lightning, of course, is that not only do you have a channel between you and the bar at that point, a payment channel, but if you trusted your buddy Rick and you have a channel with him open where you're settling IOUs, now all of a sudden he can settle up with the bar without having a relationship with the bar because he can go through you. So Lightning basically codifies those relationships, and there's not a lot of trust requirements because if something goes wrong, you just settle the state of that channel to the base layer. So you just go to the Supreme Court, so to speak, which is Bitcoin itself, and you sort of settle up down there. So the trade-off is that it's pretty complex and it's harder to understand. And if you're really using Lightning directly as an individual, you have to do some channel management and sort of manage your liquidity. But I would expect that ultimately, smart startups that are building on top of this stuff would figure out how to abstract that away, and regular people could just benefit from the system without worrying too much about the guts. The same way that when you make a credit card payment, you're not really thinking much about, the 10 discrete steps that occur where your payment is authorized and your merchant bank is communicating ultimately with an acquiring bank, and all of these financial institutions are sort of communicating with each other, and all that results in you getting a coffee. You're not even aware of that stuff. Same thing with Lightning. I think ultimately end users aren't going to need to know or really care about the guts of the system.
Okay, so that makes sense. What in my mind, what we're describing, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know tech, and I almost flunked out of high school here. So, but I just see this, or the dollar for that matter, any sovereign fiat currency as a network, because it's being lent. You've got banking institutions, you've got the central bank, you've got the users. So it's creating this, and so we have all these competing networks. So for Bitcoin to take over, let's say, from the dollar, it's going to have to compete with the dollar-based network. So I know the argument, I'm guessing the argument from a lot of the Bitcoin community would be, well, it's going to do that easily because it's so superior to the dollar network. But yet when we talk about an altcoin competing with Bitcoin, if it's superior, there's no way an altcoin can do it because the Bitcoin network, it has a head start. And so it's kind of two different arguments there. It's the same argument, but how you want to look at it based on what your view is. So my point there is, if we can assume that Bitcoin has such a head start that there's no way an altcoin can compete with it, even if it is superior, then how does the Bitcoin network compete with the dollar network, because the dollar network has such a head start?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And honestly, a very original point. I haven't heard that yet, I would say, but it is a double standard if you were to try and argue that way. You're right. The first thing I'd say would be, Bitcoin's advantage relative to altcoins, I would say, is not just a function of its head start in, a purely mechanical sense.
Okay.
I think it has sort of values that are embedded into the system that most of its competitors do not possess, basically. So the main one would be a monetary credibility, so a real commitment to monetary soundness and a specific supply schedule. That's something that very few altcoins even aspire to have. Mostly they compete on kind of a technical basis, which in my mind is completely wrong-headed, right? I mean, it's not actually about the technology at the end of the day. It's about, are you creating a politically neutral and fair network with no insiders, So Bitcoin knows the game it's playing. A lot of altcoin competitors don't even know the game they're playing. They don't even know the rules of the game. They just have this naive view that, oh, if we create like slightly different cryptography or maybe different transactional types and we sort of tinker here and there, we'll just take over because our system is obviously better. Totally not how it works. You know, you're right, it's partly the network, but it's also what are the values that are encoded in that system? What's the respect for property rights? Like, what is the development process? Is there a commitment to genuine security? What was the issuance like? Was the issuance one where there was sort of monetary fairness? Was there a lot of seigniorage where one third party took control of 20% or 30% of the supply at inception? Like, those are really important distinguishing factors, which I would say set Bitcoin apart from most of the competitors. If you look at Ethereum, its number one competitor, Ethereum doesn't compete along the domains that make Bitcoin great because Ethereum knows it can't compete there, right? What does Ethereum compete on? Expressivity, more programmability. It competes on a fast pace of innovation as opposed to Bitcoin's relatively slow, deliberate pace. It competes on having more centralization, more hard forks, a more frequent pace of updates, and basically flying closer to the sun in terms of taking on risk. And then, you know, Ethereum aspires to be this network that lots of different tokens live on, whereas Bitcoin is mostly in service of the one asset on Bitcoin, which is Bitcoin. So, you know, Ethereum was kind of smart about it because it knew it's never going to have more monetary credibility than Bitcoin. It's never going to have a better launch mythology, a launch story than Bitcoin. And so the Ethereans kind of understood that. They're like, okay, well, we're going to make something that's totally different trade-offs, and we'll do our own thing. And so Ethereum had success doing that. But if Ethereum tried to adopt Bitcoin's approach to soundness and deliberate pace of development and security, it wouldn't be able to successfully do that, and it probably wouldn't be able to compete on that basis. So that's my quick note on, you know, the competitive dynamics.